I was 26 the summer I decided to take a long solo camping trip deep into the wild parts of northern Arizona. It was 2019, and I had been saving for months to take a long break from work, clear my head. I had gotten a cheap secondhand truck, loaded it with supplies, a thick canvas tent, a used sleeping bag, some freeze-dried meals, and a heavy cooler full of what I thought would last me 2 weeks. The spot I picked wasn't an official campground. It was a patch of land near the Navajo Nation, out past Tuba City, way off the paved roads. It was open, scrubby land with low brush, patches of thick trees, and long rocky stretches that crunched under your boots. Hardly anyone came out there. It felt like the middle of nowhere, and that's exactly what I wanted. The first few days were peaceful. I set up my tent near a slight rise where I could see a good distance all around. I spent my mornings hiking the shallow canyons and scattered mesas, afternoons fishing in a small creek a few miles away, and evenings sitting by the fire as the sky burned orange, then purple, then black. I kept a journal, wrote down everything I noticed. The way the sun cracked the earth, the strange shape of the clouds, the lizards darting across the rocks. I felt good, alive, like I had stepped out of the noisy, crowded world and found something older, slower. On the fourth night, after a long hike back from the creek, something felt off. I couldn't really explain it. The wind had picked up, whispering through the low sagebrush, and there was a smell in the air. A dry, dusty smell, but with something else underneath it. Something sour, metallic. I brushed it off. Maybe it was the wind stirring up something dead. I had seen plenty of animal bones scattered around. Deer, coyotes, even what looked like a wild horse once. I built a fire and cooked some beans over the flames. I watched the stars blink awake. It got colder than usual that night. The wind howled low, almost like a voice, threading through the bushes. When I finally crawled into my sleeping bag, I left the fire burning low. I figured the light might keep any curious animals away. I woke up around 2 a.m. to a sound. It was sharp, too quick to be the wind. A snapping of branches close to the tent. My heart kicked up, fast and hard. I laid still, ears straining. Another snap, then a soft scrape, like something dragging across the canvas of the tent. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I didn't have a gun, just a heavy hunting knife strapped to my belt. The smart part of me whispered to stay quiet, stay small. Minutes dragged by. Eventually, the sounds faded. I don't know how long I lay there, stiff as a board, before I finally passed out again, the adrenaline finally burning out. In the morning, there were tracks outside the tent. Not boot prints, not paw prints either. They were weird, long, wide, with deep impressions at the toe, like claws had dug into the dirt. My first thought was a bear, but it didn't seem right. Too narrow, too long. I packed up my gear faster than I ever had and moved camp a few miles down, closer to the creek. I set up in a thick patch of juniper trees, hidden from open view. I told myself it was probably just an animal, maybe a sick coyote, staggering around on 2 legs the way injured ones sometimes do. I tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out thin and dry. The next 2 days were fine. I kept busy, hiked farther, fished longer. But at night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the trees, every rustle of the brush, set my nerves on edge. On the 7th night, I made the mistake of wandering too far from camp after dark. I had been following the creek upstream, watching the way the last light turned the water into a ribbon of silver. I didn't realize how fast the sun was dropping behind the mesas. When it finally clicked, the world had already gone purple-blue. I turned back fast, stumbling over rocks, my flashlight bobbing wild beams across the ground. The trees crowded closer the farther I went, their twisted trunks throwing long, crooked shadows. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural growl. It wasn't close, not yet, but it was behind me, following. I broke into a run. I didn't care about stepping quiet anymore. I crashed through the brush, heart hammering, ears full of the sound of my own breath. I didn't stop until I saw the flicker of my fire through the trees. I dove into camp, yanking my knife from my belt, spinning around. Nothing there. I stayed up all night by the fire, shivering from more than just the cold. I kept the flames high, feeding it everything I could find. Sticks, branches, even some of my notebook pages when the wood got low. Every time the fire cracked and popped, I flinched. The next morning, I told myself I'd had enough. I packed up everything, crammed it all into the truck, and headed out. But the roads out there were rough, nothing but narrow dirt tracks twisted through the brush. I hadn't gone 10 miles before one of the tires blew out. I cursed under my breath, pulled over, and got out to check. It was shredded, like something had slashed it, not just a normal pop. I didn't have a spare. I cursed myself harder. Stupid mistake. I had gotten too cocky, too far out. There was no cell service. I was at least 25 miles from the nearest highway. No choice but to walk. I stuffed a few essentials into my backpack, water, the knife, some beef jerky, and started walking back toward the nearest road, boots kicking up little puffs of dust. The heat was brutal. The sun baked down. The horizon wavered with false rivers of shimmering heat. After a few hours, I noticed I wasn't alone. I saw it first as a shape in the distance, too big for a coyote, too lean for a bear. It moved weird, loping, almost limping, but fast. Every time I looked straight at it, it seemed to pause, like it knew I could see it. I kept walking, fast, eyes on the dirt road, one foot in front of the other. I didn't look back again for a long time. When I finally did, it was closer, a lot closer. I still couldn't make out details, just that it was wrong. Too long in the limbs, head cocked at a strange angle. I wanted to run, but I knew it would chase me if I did. I had to be smart, stay calm. I kept walking, slower now, acting like I hadn't seen it. My mouth was dry as dust. Every nerve screamed at me to bolt. It stayed back about 50 yards, just enough that I could see it if I glanced over my shoulder. The sun started to dip lower. Long shadows crept across the land. I could feel the temperature dropping fast, the sweat on my back turning cold. Around twilight, I saw something that nearly made me cry with relief. An old, broken-down cattle pen, sagging into the earth. There was a small shed nearby, half collapsed but still standing. Shelter. I made for it, fast but not running. The door to the shed hung crooked, swinging on one hinge. I ducked inside, pulled it shut as best I could, and shoved an old broken crate against it. Inside, it stank of rot and mold. Mice scurried in the corners, but it was something. I crouched in the far corner, knife out, listening to the wind scream through the cracks. After maybe half an hour, I heard it, sniffing at the door, soft at first, then harder, a low, wet growl rumbling from deep in its chest. The door creaked under the pressure. The whole shed groaned. Dust fell from the beams above. I gripped the knife so hard my hand hurt. I thought about making a break for it. But where would I go? Open land for miles. It would run me down in seconds. The thing paced outside for hours. I could hear its nails clicking on the wood, the heavy scrape of its body brushing the walls. Then, just before dawn, it stopped. Silence. I waited, barely breathing, until the first weak gray light started leaking into the shed. Only then did I crack the door and peek out. Nothing there. I slipped out, heart hammering, every nerve on fire. I didn't see it anywhere. I didn't stop moving. I didn't even look back. I just started walking, faster than I thought possible, toward the highway. Took hours. My feet blistered. My throat felt like sandpaper. But around mid-morning, a battered old pickup rumbled up the road. A rancher. I must have looked like hell because he didn't ask a lot of questions. Just waved me into the cab and handed me a bottle of warm water. He dropped me off in Tuba City, and from there, I got a bus back toward Phoenix. I left the truck behind. I didn't care. I didn't even file an insurance claim. I never went back for my camping gear either. For months after, I had nightmares about the smell, the shape, the way it moved. I couldn't shake the feeling that it hadn't just been an animal. That maybe it had been a person once. A person twisted and broken by something too heavy to carry. People like to talk about skinwalkers out there, witches, shapeshifters, but what scared me wasn't the old stories. It was how real it all felt, how close it got, how it didn't need magic to be something that hunted me across the empty land. It was real enough. It was late September 2014 when I decided to go on a camping trip alone. I was 27 then, working some boring office job in Little Rock, Arkansas. Life felt like it was passing by in slow motion, and I needed a break from the constant buzzing of fluorescent lights and ringing phones. I camped a few times before, mostly with friends, but never really alone. Something about doing it solo felt like it would clear my head. I picked a place called Hollow Creek Forest. It wasn't a touristy spot, barely even showed up on maps unless you really zoomed in. A friend of mine mentioned it once, said it was peaceful, had a small lake deep inside, and barely anyone ever went there. That sounded perfect to me. I packed my old camping gear, enough food and water for a few days, a little hatchet, my heavy flashlight, a good survival knife I barely ever used, and some basic first aid supplies. I tossed everything into my beat-up Toyota Tacoma and left town before the sun was even up. The drive was about 3 hours, long stretches of empty 2-lane roads, sometimes passing a tiny gas station or an old farmhouse sitting lonely against the fields. When I finally got to the dirt road that led to Hollow Creek, I almost missed it. No signs, just a gap in the trees and 2 deep tire ruts leading into the woods. The road was rough, and after about 15 minutes of crawling along at a walking pace, I found a little clearing big enough to park my truck and still leave room for other cars, though there weren't any others around. I cut the engine, grabbed my pack, and locked the truck up tight. I left a note on the dashboard, just my name, phone number, and back Sunday night, in case something went wrong. I don't know why I did that. It just felt smart. I hiked about 2 miles into the woods before I picked a spot to set up. It was right near the edge of a wide clearing, with thick trees on 3 sides and a little path leading off toward what I guessed was the lake. I pitched my old green tent, stacked some dry wood into a pile for a fire later, and set out my sleeping bag and small foam pad inside. Everything was quiet, except for the wind brushing through the leaves and the occasional crow calling out from somewhere far off. Felt peaceful, exactly what I needed. That first day, I didn't do much except explore a little. I followed the path down to the lake, a dark, still thing with thick weeds along the banks. It smelled like wet mud and old plants. I skipped some stones, sat for a while, then headed back to my camp before the light faded too much. I made a small fire, heated up a can of chili, and just sat there under the stars. I didn't even bother checking my phone. I doubted there was any signal out here anyway. The first night was cold. I bundled into my sleeping bag, listening to the forest noises around me. Crickets, the occasional snap of a branch, maybe a raccoon or something digging through the leaves. It took me a long time to fall asleep, but eventually I did. The next morning, I woke up with the sun. The fire had long since died out, and the air inside the tent was freezing. I made some instant coffee on my little camp stove, ate a granola bar, and decided to hike further along the path past the lake. I packed some water, my knife, and a few snacks and set off. The woods got thicker the deeper I went. Trees pressed close together, their branches high overhead like a woven roof. The ground was soft with layers of old leaves, and every step made a soft crunching sound. After maybe 2 hours, I found something strange. A fence. Not a modern one either. It was old, made of rough wood, half fallen in places. It stretched off into the trees in both directions, and on the other side, the woods looked even thicker. Curious, I followed the fence to the right. After about 20 minutes, I saw what it was surrounding. An old, broken-down cabin. It looked abandoned, leaning slightly to one side, its windows boarded up or shattered. The roof sagged, and there was a pile of rusted metal, maybe an old stove, in the weeds nearby. There were no paths leading to it, no clearings, no signs that anyone had been here in years. Something about it made my skin crawl a little. I don't know why. It's just wood and nails, I told myself. Probably just an old hunting cabin. Still, I didn't go any closer. I turned around and started back toward my own camp. When I got back, everything looked the same. Tent was fine, my fire ring undisturbed. I spent the afternoon gathering some more firewood and fishing a little at the lake, though I didn't catch anything. The whole time, though, I kept thinking about that cabin. Who built it? Why was it fenced off? It felt out of place somehow, like it didn't belong to the rest of the forest. That second night was worse. As I lay in my sleeping bag, staring at the nylon roof of the tent, I kept hearing noises outside. Not animal sounds, at least not ones I recognized. It was like soft footsteps, crunch, pause, crunch, then nothing. I told myself it was just deer. Hollow Creek was supposed to have tons of deer, maybe even a bear, though I hadn't seen any real signs of them. But it didn't feel like that. The steps sounded too deliberate, too slow, like someone trying to be quiet. I stayed awake for what felt like hours, heart pounding, my hand gripping the handle of my knife under the sleeping bag. Eventually, the sounds faded, and somehow I drifted off. When I woke up, the sun was already high. I stepped outside and scanned the area carefully. Everything looked fine. No footprints, no broken branches, no signs of anything unusual. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it clung to me like wet clothes. That day, I didn't go far. I stayed near my camp, gathering firewood, reading a little from the battered paperback I'd brought, and trying not to let my imagination get the better of me. But all afternoon, I felt watched, like there were eyes on me, just beyond the trees. That night, I built a bigger fire, hoping the light would keep anything, or anyone, away. I sat close to it, poking at the logs with a stick, listening to the forest crackling and shifting in the dark. Around midnight, I heard it again. Footsteps, closer this time. Crunch, pause, crunch, pause. They were slow, almost careful, like someone testing each step before putting their weight down. I killed the fire as fast as I could, stamping it out with dirt and scattering the logs. Darkness swallowed me, and I crouched low, straining to hear. My heart slammed so hard in my ears that I almost couldn't hear anything else. The steps came closer. I couldn't see anything, the flashlight was inside the tent, but I could feel it. Someone was out there. Someone was watching. I stayed crouched for what felt like forever, barely breathing. Eventually, the steps moved away, slowly, fading into the distance. I waited another hour before I dared move. I slipped into the tent, grabbed my knife and flashlight, and sat there with my back against the fabric, eyes wide open until the first gray light of dawn. I decided I was leaving. I hadn't signed up for this. Alone camping was one thing. Feeling hunted was another. I packed up as fast as I could, barely stopping to eat a handful of trail mix. Every few minutes I froze, listening for those slow, deliberate steps. But the woods stayed quiet. As I was stuffing the tent into its bag, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. About 20 feet from where I slept, carved into the trunk of a tree, was a small symbol. 3 vertical slashes, side by side, each about 6 inches long. Fresh cuts, the exposed wood was still pale. I hadn't put it there. I should have run then and there, but I couldn't stop staring at it. Felt like a warning. I shouldered my pack and started back toward the truck. Every few steps, I checked over my shoulder. The walk that had taken 2 hours to hike in felt like it took 4 to hike out. The woods pressed in tighter than I remembered, every shadow feeling too deep, every gust of wind making me jump. When I finally saw the clearing where I'd left my truck, relief flooded me. But it died just as quickly. My truck was sitting there, sure, but the back window was smashed in. Glass glittered across the seat like ice. Someone had been inside. My stomach dropped. I crept closer, knife in hand, scanning the trees around me. I checked the truck. Nothing obvious missing, but everything inside had been rifled through. My glove box hung open, papers scattered everywhere. Even my emergency kit had been pulled out and dumped onto the ground. I didn't think. I just climbed into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and jammed the key into the ignition. The truck roared to life and I tore out of there, tires throwing dirt behind me. The whole drive back, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone sprinting after me through the trees. When I finally got back to town, I didn't even go home first. I drove straight to the police station. I told them everything about the cabin, the footsteps, the symbol, the break-in. They wrote it all down, asked me if anything had been stolen. I said no, and promised to send someone to check the area. I don't know if they ever did. They didn't seem very concerned. Maybe they thought I was just a scared city boy jumping at shadows. For weeks after, I kept thinking about that place. About the fence, I had always loved getting away from people when life got too loud. In 2017, I was 27 and working long, weird shifts as a maintenance guy at an apartment complex in Colorado Springs. Summer had been brutal that year. Lots of broken air conditioners, grumpy tenants, and calls at 2 in the morning because someone's toilet overflowed again. I'd saved up some vacation days and decided to take a week off in late September. It was getting cool, but not freezing yet. Perfect time to go camping. I didn't want to go to a normal campground where people park their RVs and blast music all night. I wanted real quiet, real space. I found a spot online when I was poking around on maps late one night. An old fire lookout tower deep in the Beaverhead Deer Lodge National Forest in Montana. The tower had been abandoned for decades. Some hikers said the trail leading up to it was rough and overgrown, but you could camp near the bottom of the hill where the forest opened into a little meadow. It sounded perfect. I loaded up my truck with my old green canvas tent, a heavy sleeping bag, a cooler full of simple food, a camp stove, a bunch of water jugs, and enough gear to survive a week if something stupid happened. I didn't tell anyone exactly where I was going, just left a general area with my neighbor in case something went wrong. I figured I'd be fine. I was young, stubborn, and thought I had seen enough in my life to handle anything. The drive took almost 12 hours, but the last few hours were the worst. The paved roads turned into rough gravel, and then into what barely even looked like a road at all. I had to slow way down to crawl over rocks and through deep ruts. Trees leaned in close on both sides like they were trying to block the sun out. It was late afternoon by the time I found a spot that looked flat enough to set up camp. The meadow wasn't very big, maybe the size of a soccer field, surrounded by thick forest that climbed up into the hills. The lookout tower stood halfway up the nearest hill, barely visible through the trees. It looked rough, half the walls missing, one side leaning a little like the next good storm might finish it off. The trail leading up to it was almost invisible except for a few old wooden signs nailed to trees. Their paint so faded I couldn't read them. I set up my tent near the edge of the meadow, facing the forest. It felt safer being close to the trees somehow, like I wouldn't be a sitting duck out in the open. The air was clean and cold enough that you could see your breath a little as the sun started to dip. It smelled like pine sap, dirt, and old leaves. I got a fire going with some dry wood I gathered nearby and made myself a simple dinner. Canned chili heated up on my little stove, a bag of crackers, and a bottle of water. I sat by the fire and watched the last light fade from the sky. The stars came out thick and bright, more than I had seen in years. I didn't even realize how noisy the city was until I sat there and listened to the quiet. The first night was fine, cold but fine. I slept hard, wrapped in my sleeping bag with a wool blanket over the top for extra warmth. I woke up once when something crunched in the brush nearby, probably a deer, but it didn't bother me too much. I just listened for a minute, heart thumping a little, and when the sounds moved off into the trees, I went back to sleep. The second day, I decided to check out the old tower. I packed a day bag with water, some granola bars, my pocket knife, and a flashlight just in case. The trail was worse than I thought. Trees had fallen across it, and I had to climb over them or find ways around. Thick underbrush grabbed at my legs. I moved slow and careful, not wanting to twist an ankle out here alone. Getting close to the tower, I felt a weird kind of nervousness. It looked even worse up close. The wooden steps were broken in places, and the metal frame was covered in rust. The floorboards creaked under my boots when I carefully stepped inside. There wasn't much left inside, just a couple broken chairs, the remains of an old desk, some smashed glass from the windows. Graffiti covered the walls. Most of it was the usual junk, names, dumb messages. A few looked a little stranger. Things like, "Don't stay," and "He watches." But I figured it was just bored kids trying to spook people. Still, I didn't stay long. The place felt like it was leaning a little more every time the wind blew. I took a few pictures on my phone and picked my way back down the hill. By the time I got back to camp, It was late afternoon again. I got another fire going, made some instant soup, and sat by the flames until it was too cold to stay outside. That night was when things started feeling wrong. I was zipped up in my sleeping bag, just starting to drift off, when I heard something. Slow, heavy footsteps in the leaves. Not a deer, not the quick shuffle of a raccoon. These were slow, careful steps. I held my breath and listened. They stopped maybe 20 feet from my tent. I stayed frozen, heart hammering so loud I was sure whoever it was could hear it. After a minute, the steps moved again. Not toward me, but around me, circling. I could hear the soft crunch of leaves with every slow step. I didn't move. I didn't even think about turning on a light. I just lay there, tense and sweating, until finally the steps moved off into the trees. I didn't sleep after that. I just lay there in the dark, wide-eyed, listening. When dawn finally came, I crawled out of the tent, stiff and cold. I looked around the campsite. Nothing seemed disturbed. No trash rummaged through, no marks in the dirt that I could see. I told myself it was probably just a curious animal, maybe a bear, but deep down I didn't really believe it. Bears didn't walk in circles around tents in the middle of the night. I almost packed up and left right then, but I told myself I was overreacting. I had enough supplies and I was fine. Maybe I was just too used to the noise of the city, and real silence was playing tricks on me. The third day, I stuck closer to camp. I didn't want to go hiking again. I spent the morning gathering more firewood and double-checking my gear. Around noon, I noticed something weird. One of the wooden signs nailed to a tree near the trail, the one with the faded paint, was gone. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe it had finally rotted off and fallen. But when I walked over to check, I couldn't find it anywhere on the ground. That evening, I built my fire early and kept it big. I didn't want the dark pressing in so hard. I ate a cold dinner because I didn't want to turn my back on the woods long enough to cook. The sun went down fast, and the shadows got deep and thick. That night, the steps came back. Same slow, deliberate pacing around my tent. I didn't breathe. I barely blinked. They came closer this time. I could hear twigs snapping underfoot. I could even hear soft breathing, like someone trying hard not to make noise but failing. At one point, something brushed against the side of my tent. Just a light touch, like the tip of a finger trailing along the fabric. I thought about grabbing my flashlight, my knife, my keys, and making a run for the truck. But the truck was parked 50 yards away, on the other side of the clearing. If whoever was out there wanted to stop me, they could easily do it before I even got halfway. I stayed put, heart hammering, every muscle locked up. Hours seemed to drag by before the footsteps moved off again. But I still didn't sleep. I waited, tense, until the sky started to lighten with the first hints of dawn. When I finally unzipped my tent and stepped out, I saw something that made my stomach twist. On the ground, right in front of my tent door, was the missing wooden sign, propped up carefully, like someone had placed it there on purpose. The paint was so faded you could barely make it out, but under the old graffiti you could still read 3 words. Not safe here. That was it for me. I packed up faster than I thought possible. I didn't even bother folding my tent properly, just stuffed it into the truck bed. I didn't eat, didn't drink, didn't stop moving. I kept glancing over my shoulder at the trees, half expecting to see someone standing there, watching. The drive out was worse than coming in. Every bump and jolt on the rough trail felt like it was taking years off my life. I kept imagining I'd see someone in my mirror, or worse, that my truck would break down and I'd be stranded out there. When I finally hit the main road hours later, I almost cried with relief. I didn't stop driving until I was back in Colorado, exhausted, dirty, and running on adrenaline fumes. I never reported it. I figured no one would believe me anyway. And honestly, I didn't want to go back to show anyone where it happened. I just wanted to forget. It's been years now, and I still think about it sometimes. I still camp, but never alone. Never that deep in the woods. I stick to busy parks, crowded campsites, places with other people close enough to hear if something goes wrong. I don't know who or what was out there those nights. I don't want to know. But one thing is clear. There are places out there where you aren't supposed to be. And sometimes, if you ignore the warnings, you find out why. I was 32 years old the summer it happened. It was 2022, and I had been working in corporate insurance sales for almost a decade. I wasn't a top dog, but I was doing fine. I lived alone in a small apartment just outside Kansas City, Missouri. I didn't have much family left, and most of my friends had moved away or gotten too busy with families of their own. I wasn't unhappy, but there were definitely days I felt like I was drifting. That July, my company decided to hold a leadership retreat. They said it was for team building and strategic planning, but everyone knew it was just an excuse for the regional managers to get drunk in the woods. It was supposed to be a casual camping trip. No big hotels, no PowerPoint presentations, just tents, hiking boots, and late-night bonfires. We'd been assigned to groups based on our sales regions. My group would be meeting up at a state park about 3 hours west of the city, somewhere close to the small town of Newton. There were 8 of us. I didn't know any of them well. I recognized a couple of faces from company Zoom calls, but that was about it. The only real instruction we'd been given was to bring our own camping gear, food, and anything we needed to survive 3 days out there. Corporate would reimburse us later. A few people complained about that, but I figured it might actually be a nice break from the regular grind. On the morning we were supposed to leave, I packed up my old tent, a sleeping bag, 2 coolers of food and drinks, a small propane stove, some clothes, and a few basic supplies like a flashlight, bug spray, and first aid kit. I wasn't a seasoned outdoorsman, but I had gone camping a few times when I was a kid with my uncle, so I felt okay about it. I filled my truck with gas, double-checked that I had everything, and headed out. The drive was mostly flat farmland. Mile after mile of brown and green fields baking under a heavy blue sky. The deeper into the country I got, the more the radio stations dropped off until I was flipping between static and old country songs. I finally made it to the meeting point, a dusty gravel lot at the edge of the state park around noon. There were already a few other cars and trucks parked there. People were milling around, adjusting gear, stretching, drinking from water bottles. I recognized a couple of them from email chains. A tall blonde guy named Derek, a woman named Elise who always wore bright scarves on Zoom, and a heavyset guy named Marcus who ran the Oklahoma region. The others were strangers. We waited for another 30 minutes until everyone showed up. The unofficial leader of our group, a guy named Scott from the Denver office, clapped his hands and pointed us toward a trailhead. According to him, the campsite was about 2 miles in, next to a small lake. No vehicles allowed past the parking lot. We had to hike everything in. It was brutally hot. The trail wound through scrubby oak trees and low brush. Dust clung to the sweat on my arms and neck. My pack felt heavier with every step. After about an hour of hiking, we reached a clearing by the lake. There wasn't much there. Just a couple of old fire pits made of stones, some rough picnic tables, and a couple of dry, cracked logs people had dragged over to sit on. The water looked murky and still, a gray-brown surface broken only by a few insects skimming across it. We spread out and started setting up camp. I found a relatively flat patch of ground a little back from the water and pitched my tent there. Some of the others grouped closer together, their tents nearly touching. I didn't mind being a little farther out. I figured it would be quieter at night. Once everything was up, we spent the afternoon half-heartedly team building, mostly sitting around, making awkward small talk, throwing a frisbee, and complaining about the heat. Around dusk, Scott got a fire going. We cooked hot dogs and drank beer from the coolers we'd lugged in. For a while, it actually felt nice, relaxed. No emails, no deadlines, no phones buzzing. As the sun dipped behind the trees, the bugs came out in full force. Big, whining mosquitoes and moths the size of your thumb. We slapped at them and sprayed ourselves with DEET until the air smelled like chemicals. Someone pulled out a Bluetooth speaker and started playing music. It was mostly old rock songs and country ballads. I leaned back against a log, watching the flames snap and pop, feeling the beer buzz settle into my chest. By midnight, most people had turned in. I stayed up a little longer, poking at the fire, staring into the dark woods beyond the ring of light. There was something unsettling about how empty it felt. No city noise, no headlights, no houses. Just endless black trees and the slow, steady chirping of crickets. I finally crawled into my tent around 1 in the morning. The ground was hard and uneven under my sleeping bag. I shifted around, trying to find a comfortable position, listening to the sounds outside. Every crack of a twig or rustle of leaves made my heart jump a little. But eventually, exhaustion won out and I drifted off. The first night passed without anything unusual. I woke up sticky and sore, blinking against the harsh morning sun. We had a lazy breakfast, instant coffee and granola bars, and then set off on a group hike around the lake. It was supposed to be another team-building exercise, but it mostly turned into a slow, sweaty trudge. The trail was overgrown in places, with thorny bushes grabbing at our clothes and spiderwebs stretched across the path. At one point, we passed an old abandoned structure tucked into the trees. It looked like it had once been a ranger's cabin, a squat, weathered building with half the roof caved in. We joked about staying there instead of the tents, but nobody went too close. There was something wrong about the place. It didn't feel haunted, exactly, just forgotten. Like if you stepped inside, you might fall through the floor and nobody would find you for weeks. After the hike, we spent most of the afternoon swimming in the lake to cool off. The water was slimy and smelled faintly of algae, but it was better than roasting in the sun. A few people tried fishing with hand lines, but I don't think anyone caught anything. By dinner, a few of us were nursing sunburns and minor scrapes from the trail. That night, the mood shifted a little. People were a little quieter around the fire. Maybe it was the heat or the bugs or just the general weariness setting in. I kept catching Derek glancing off into the woods like he was expecting something to come crashing through the trees. Scott drank more than he should have and passed out half in, half out of his tent. I wasn't sure why, but I couldn't relax. Something about the campsite felt different, like the woods were holding their breath. I brushed it off as paranoia, tried to focus on roasting a marshmallow over the fire. But when I went to bed, I had a hard time sleeping. I kept thinking I heard footsteps outside my tent. Soft, shuffling steps like someone circling. Every time I sat up and listened hard, the sound would stop. Eventually, I must have drifted off, because I woke up to the gray light of dawn filtering through the nylon walls. The third day was when everything went wrong. We were supposed to have one final morning meeting by the fire before packing up. Just a casual chat about goals and reflections. But when I walked over to the fire pit, coffee mug in hand, something was off. Elise and Marcus were already there, looking tense. Derek was pacing near the trees, glancing around like he was looking for something. Scott wasn't there at all. At first, we thought he might still be passed out in his tent. But when Derek went to check, the tent was empty. His sleeping bag was unzipped and pushed aside. His boots were gone. His pack was missing, too. It looked like he had just gotten up and walked off in the middle of the night. We tried calling for him, shouting into the woods. No answer. After an hour of searching, we regrouped by the fire, sweaty and frustrated. It didn't make sense. Scott was a loud, cocky guy. The idea of him wandering off alone without telling anyone was bizarre. And it wasn't like there were a lot of places to go. The park wasn't huge, but the woods were dense and confusing. If he had gotten lost, he could be wandering in circles a mile away. We argued for a while about what to do. Eventually, Marcus and Elise decided to hike back to the parking lot and call for help. The rest of us stayed at the camp in case Scott came back. I didn't like it, sitting there, feeling useless, staring into the trees. The feeling that something was wrong was almost overwhelming now. An hour passed, too. No sign of Marcus and Elise. No sign of Scott. The sun climbed high and hot overhead, baking the clearing. Derek and I decided we couldn't just sit there anymore. We grabbed our water bottles and started down the trail toward the parking lot. The trail looked different in the harsh light. Shadows pooled under the trees. Every bush and fallen branch looked like something crouching, waiting. I tried to shake it off, just the heat messing with my head. About halfway to the parking lot, we found Marcus. He was lying in the brush a few feet off the trail. His face was pale, sweaty, twisted in pain. His ankle was swollen and twisted at a sick angle. He said he had tripped trying to run back toward camp. Elise was still ahead, he said, but he hadn't seen her in a while. We helped him sit up, but he couldn't walk. Derek stayed with him while I kept going. Back in the fall of 2017, when I was 23, me and my buddies from the NAB team decided to go for a camping trip deep into the woods. It wasn't anything official, just a few of us who were close, wanting to get away from the noise for a few days. We'd planned it for a while, picking a spot way out in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey, somewhere you couldn't hear traffic and the cell phone reception disappeared after the first few miles in. It was supposed to be one of those weekends you remember for the rest of your life, and it was just not for the reasons we thought. The team was made up of me, Andy, 24, Marcus, 22, Liam, 23, and Brett, 25. We'd been tight for a couple years, doing training exercises, survival drills, even some basic search and rescue stuff. We trusted each other, and that was important for what was about to happen. We packed light, just enough to last 3 nights. Tents, sleeping bags, fire starters, basic food, water filters, a couple of knives, and gear to cook over a fire. We all carried radios too, the kind that worked over a few miles, just in case we got split up. The plan was to hike about 6 miles from the dirt road where we left the trucks. Past the second ridge was a spot Liam swore he found once when he was hiking alone. A little clearing near a small creek. Sounded perfect. The first day was smooth. We parked around noon, packed up our gear, and started hiking. The sun was out but low already because of the thick trees. You could feel the cold coming through the woods. That sharp early October chill where the air bites your skin and your breath comes out in little white puffs. The forest was thicker than I expected. Pines mostly, tall and skinny, reaching up like black poles into the sky. The ground was soft, covered in dead needles and moss, and everything smelled damp and earthy. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that almost hums in your ears. Just the crunch of our boots, the occasional snap of a branch. Took us a little longer than planned to get there. By the time we found the clearing, it was close to sunset. We set up quick 2 tents, one for me and Marcus, one for Andy and Brett. We built a fire pit with rocks we found by the creek, got a fire going, and cooked some canned stew and hot dogs. Sitting around the fire, I remember thinking it was exactly what I needed. No noise, no traffic, no phones buzzing. Just the 4 of us, the woods, and the fire crackling. The first night was uneventful. I slept hard, woke up once to take a leak and looked up to see a sky packed with stars, clearer than I'd seen in years. It was freezing out, and my boots crunched in the frost that had already formed on the grass. The next day we spent exploring. We followed the creek for a few miles upstream, found an old deer stand falling apart in the trees, even saw some fresh tracks. Deer, raccoon, probably a fox. Normal stuff. We were careful not to stray too far from camp, keeping an eye on the sun and checking our handheld GPS every hour or so. Around mid-afternoon, we headed back to camp. That's when we noticed it. Someone had been there. At first, it was just little things. Our campfire was messed with, the logs weren't the way we left them. Brett's pack had been unzipped and rifled through, stuff pulled out and dumped on the ground. Nothing was stolen, but it was clear someone had been there. It was a weird feeling. Out there, that far in, you don't expect to see anybody. Most people can't even find their way that deep. And whoever it was, they didn't leave a note, didn't leave anything behind. Just messed with our stuff. We all kind of played it off, trying to shake it off like it was nothing. Maybe a raccoon, we said, even though we all knew no raccoon was unzipping a heavy-duty backpack. We decided to tighten up. We set up a tripwire around the camp using fishing line and little bells we kept for this kind of thing. Not exactly high-tech, but good enough to wake us if someone or something came poking around. That night, the woods felt different. Still no sound, no crickets, no owls, nothing. Just the fire crackling and the wind hissing through the pines. We kept the fire small, sat close together, talking low, mostly just swapping old team stories. I couldn't stop checking the tree line. Every few minutes, my eyes would flick over to the dark wall of trees just beyond the reach of the firelight. felt like something was out there, watching, waiting. We all went to bed around midnight. I fell asleep eventually, but it was a shallow, restless kind of sleep where every little noise jerks you half awake. Sometime deep in the night, the bells rang. Not loud, just a faint jingle like something brushing the wire. I snapped awake, heart pounding. I laid there, frozen, listening. For a minute, nothing. Just the wind picking up, making the tent walls ripple. Then another jingle, closer this time. I reached over and shook Marcus. He was already awake, breathing shallow. Neither of us moved. We didn't say a word, just listened. Crunch, a footstep, heavy, slow, about 10 feet from the tent. Crunch, crunch, moving around the tent, slow and deliberate. I gripped my knife under the sleeping bag. Not much use against a gun, but it made me feel less helpless. I could hear Marcus doing the same. Whoever it was, they circled the tent once, maybe twice. I could hear their breathing at one point, slow, controlled, like they were trying to be quiet but weren't used to the silence of the deep woods. Eventually, the footsteps faded away toward the creek. I don't think I slept after that. When daylight finally came, we all crawled out of the tents, faces pale, nerves fried. None of us said much. We packed up fast, deciding to cut the trip short. It wasn't worth it anymore. But when we went to grab our packs, we realized it wasn't over. Every pack had been slashed open. Not stolen, just ruined. Food dumped out, water containers sliced, sleeping bags shredded. Someone had taken a knife to everything. Not one of us had heard it. Couldn't have been more than an hour or two before sunrise. We didn't waste time. We grabbed what we could salvage, ditched the rest, and started hiking out fast, sticking tight together, heads on a swivel. No joking around, no sightseeing, just moving. The woods were dead silent again. No birds, no wind, just that oppressive, smothering quiet. After about an hour, we stopped for a breather. That's when we found the footprints. Not ours. Bigger, wider, heavy boots, maybe steel-toed. Fresh too, pressed deep into the soft earth. They weren't headed back toward the road. They were following us. The sick feeling in my gut turned into full-on fear. We weren't alone out there, and whoever was following us wasn't interested in making friends. We picked up the pace, practically jogging now, stopping only to double-check the map and make sure we were still on course. Another hour passed, then another. At one point, I swear I saw something through the trees, just a flash of movement, a dark shape keeping pace with us maybe 50 yards off to the right. Too far to make out clearly, but close enough to know we weren't imagining things. We didn't talk about it. We just moved faster. By mid-afternoon, we finally saw the road through the trees. Relief hit me so hard I almost dropped my pack and ran. We burst out onto the dirt road, panting, filthy, and half frozen. The trucks were still there, thank God, untouched. We didn't even bother checking for damage. We threw the gear into the beds, piled into the cabs, and peeled out, tires spitting gravel. I didn't start breathing normal again until we hit the main highway an hour later. We never reported it. What could we say? Some psycho in the woods messed with our stuff and scared the hell out of us? No proof, no faces, nothing. We didn't talk about it much after, either. It hung over us, unspoken, like a bad scar you don't want to poke at. That night, safe at home, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind against the window set my nerves jangling. I kept seeing that dark shape in the trees, kept hearing the faint jingle of the bells. It's been years now, and I still don't go deep into the woods anymore. Not without backup, not without a lot more firepower. And I always make sure someone knows exactly where I'm going and when I'll be back. I learned something out there, something they don't teach you in training. It's not just bears or bad, whether you have to watch for in the wild. Sometimes the most dangerous thing out there is another person, and sometimes they find you first. I was 26 years old when I decided to go camping alone one rainy October weekend in 2018. I had been feeling boxed in from working a desk job at a trucking company in Kansas City, Missouri, and I just needed a break from the office lights and small talk. I planned to head a couple hours south to a place called Pine Hollow State Forest, a quiet stretch of woods that not many people bothered to visit, especially not in the fall when it got cold and the rains came heavy. I packed light, a one-person tent, a sleeping bag rated for cold weather, 2 changes of clothes, a rain jacket, some food in a cooler, my old Ruger .22 just in case, and the usual small camping gear. A first aid kit, flashlight, batteries, tarp, water jug, matches, lighter, and a small propane stove. I didn't tell too many people I was going. Just left a text with my brother saying I'd be back by Sunday night. It was already raining when I left on Saturday morning. Big sheets of it blurred the highway, and by the time I made it to the forest turnoff around noon, the dirt roads leading into the deeper parts of the woods were already muddy and slick. My little pickup truck slid a little as I turned in, tires spinning before catching. The deeper I drove, the less I could see. The forest got thicker and darker, the rain pounding on the roof of the truck so loud it was hard to think. I passed a few wide, cleared areas where people normally camped, but they were all flooded out. Big puddles swallowed the ground in low spots, and everything else looked like a swamp. After driving another half hour down rougher, narrower roads, I finally found a spot that looked higher and drier than the rest. A little clearing where the trees opened up and the ground rose a little above the rest of the forest. It wasn't much, but it would do. I pulled off, parked crooked under some dripping pine trees, and got out into the cold rain. It wasn't hard rain like a summer storm. It was that heavy, soaking fall rain that just came straight down, cold as hell, steady, like a curtain. I moved fast, threw a tarp over the truck bed, pulled my gear out, and started setting up my tent a little ways from the truck, up on a slight rise where the ground looked firm. The mud sucked at my boots, and every time I knelt down to stake the tent, my jeans soaked through. By the time I had the tent up and the rain fly stretched tight, I was freezing, soaked to the skin, and already questioning why the hell I thought this was a good idea. I got inside the tent just long enough to change into dry clothes, then huddled in the truck cab with the heater on full blast until my hands stopped feeling numb. The plan was simple: spend one night out here, wake up early Sunday, and drive back. No big hikes, no crazy adventures, just a night away from everything. The rain didn't let up. It just kept falling, steady and cold. By mid-afternoon, it was already dim like evening. I couldn't even hear the forest over the sound of the rain. No birds, no wind in the trees, just the constant drumming on the leaves and my truck. Around 4 p.m., I cooked a quick meal on the propane stove, sitting under the back hatch of the truck to stay a little dry. Canned soup, stale bread, some beef jerky. Simple stuff. After eating, I thought about walking around a bit, maybe stretch my legs, but the ground was a mess and I didn't want to slip and bust an ankle in the middle of nowhere. Instead, I cleaned up, locked the cooler back in the truck, checked my tent one more time, and crawled inside for the night. I brought my Ruger and flashlight with me, just to be safe. It got dark fast. By 6 p.m., it was pitch black outside. The rain still came steady, drumming hard on the tent roof, little streams of water gurgling somewhere in the brush nearby. I lay there, bundled in my sleeping bag, listening. That's when I started feeling uneasy. First, I thought it was just being alone. It's easy to get spooked when you're by yourself in the woods, especially in bad weather. Every little noise feels bigger. Every creak or splash sounds like something moving. But this was different. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there. I kept telling myself it was just an animal. Maybe a deer passing through, maybe a raccoon or something nosing around for food. But the longer I lay there, the stronger the feeling got. It wasn't just the rain I was hearing. Somewhere behind it, beneath it, I could hear something else. A rhythm that didn't match the rain. Soft, almost like footsteps. Slow, squelching a little like boots in the mud. I stayed absolutely still, my heart hammering in my chest. I clicked off my flashlight. I didn't want whoever or whatever it was to see any light. The steps got closer, not fast, slow, almost cautious, like someone trying not to be heard over the rain. But I could hear it just barely. Wet, sucking sounds in the mud. Heavy steps. I tightened my hand around the grip of my Ruger, heart thudding in my ears. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The steps circled the tent once, slow and deliberate. I could hear breathing now, heavy, wet breathing, like someone out of shape and tired. I squeezed my eyes shut, listening, frozen. Then nothing. Silence except for the rain. Minutes passed. Maybe 20, maybe 30. I lost track. I didn't dare move. I didn't even turn on the flashlight. I just stayed there, every nerve straining. When I finally opened my eyes, it was full dark inside the tent. I lay there, wide awake, listening to the rain for any sign that whoever had been there was still nearby. Eventually, exhaustion won out. Sometime in the early morning hours, I drifted into a shallow, fitful sleep. When I woke up, it was still raining. A little lighter now, more of a mist than a downpour. The world outside the tent was gray and wet and cold. I dressed fast, packed up my sleeping bag, and crawled out of the tent into the mud. Everything was soaked. My boots sank an inch deep into the muck with every step. The truck was sitting low, almost stuck. I glanced around, heart hammering again. At first, I didn't see anything. Just wet trees, gray skies, puddles everywhere. Then I spotted them. Boot prints. Not mine. Big, deep boot prints circling the tent. Sinking heavy into the mud, clear as day. They weren't there when I set up camp. I knew that for a fact. I hadn't walked circles around the tent. And they weren't fresh from that morning either. The rain had softened the edges, made them sag a little, like they'd been made hours ago. Sometime in the night, I swallowed hard, scanning the woods. I couldn't see anyone, couldn't hear anything but the soft, misty drizzle coming down through the trees. I didn't waste time. I tore the tent down in about 2 minutes flat, wadding it up into the bed of the truck. Didn't even bother folding it. I just threw everything in, slammed the tailgate shut, and scrambled into the cab. The truck tires spun in the mud as I tried to pull out. I had to rock it, back and forth, gunning the engine, heart pounding, trying not to panic. Finally, with a great sucking sound, the tires caught and I lurched forward. I didn't look back. I followed the rutted dirt road, fishtailing through the mud, windshield wipers barely keeping up with the misty rain. Branches scraped the sides of the truck as I barreled through the narrow forest paths, trying to put as much distance between me and that campsite as fast as I could. It took almost an hour to make it back to the main road. By then, the rain had mostly stopped, just a fine drizzle misting down from the low gray sky. The paved road looked like salvation when I finally hit it, the tires humming on the wet asphalt. I drove straight back to Kansas City without stopping. I didn't tell anyone about what happened. When my brother asked how the trip was, I just said it rained too much and I came home early. Left it at that. But the feeling stayed with me. Somewhere out there in the rain, someone had been standing just outside my tent, watching, circling, breathing, waiting. I don't know what they wanted. I don't know if they were just curious or if they were planning something worse. All I know is if I hadn't woken up when I did, if I hadn't stayed quiet and still, maybe that night would have ended very differently. I never went back to Pine Hollow after that. I sold my old camping gear at a garage sale a few months later and haven't been camping alone since. Some nights when it rains, that cold, soaking fall rain, I still think about it, still wonder who was out there, still wonder what would have happened if I had made a sound or turned on my flashlight or stepped outside. And I'm glad I never found out. It was 2019, and I had just turned 28. I had been working nonstop at a construction company in Melbourne, barely taking any time off in the last few years. When I finally got a week of leave, I decided to head out on a solo camping trip. I didn't want to go to a crowded place where families and tourists packed every bit of open space. I wanted something quieter. A mate of mine once mentioned a spot called Dargo High Plains, a remote area deep in Victoria's alpine country. Not many people went that far unless they were serious about four-wheel driving or were old bushmen who knew the land like the back of their hand. It sounded perfect. I spent a full day packing my old Hilux, loading it with everything I thought I might need: my tent, a couple of tarps, a thick sleeping bag, a small gas stove, plenty of food and water, a hatchet, and even an old .22 rifle for safety. Not that I thought I'd need it, but out bush, you never knew. Snakes, wild dogs, and feral pigs were real problems out there. I also threw in my big maglite torch, a few knives, and a first aid kit. The drive took nearly 8 hours. The paved roads slowly gave way to dirt tracks, and my GPS stopped working properly after a while. Good thing I had printed out some old maps and written down some rough directions. The farther I drove, the thinner the trees got, replaced by vast open plains and patches of dense eucalyptus forests. At one point, I didn't see another car for almost 3 hours. By late afternoon, I found a clearing that seemed untouched for a long time. There were no fire pits, no tire tracks, and no rubbish. It was perfect. A narrow creek ran nearby, and the land was flat enough for a tent. I set up camp quickly, pitching my small green tent under a few large gum trees that gave a bit of shade. After securing the tarps and gathering some fallen branches for a small fire, I made myself a simple dinner of canned beans and sausages. I sat by the fire as the sun sank below the distant hills, painting the sky in layers of purple and orange. There was no sound except for the crackling fire and the soft rustle of the wind through the trees. No cars, no voices, nothing. It was peaceful, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could actually breathe properly. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply. I climbed into my tent, zipped it up tight, and slid into my sleeping bag. I lay there in the dark, listening to the sounds outside. The occasional snap of a twig, the distant calls of night birds, and once or twice, what sounded like the howl of a dingo way off in the hills. I wasn't worried. I had camped plenty of times before, and the Australian bush at night could sound eerie, but most of it was harmless. I must have drifted off sometime after midnight. I woke up with a jolt. I didn't know what woke me at first. The fire had died down outside, and the only light came from the half moon overhead. I lay perfectly still, listening. That's when I heard it. A faint crunching sound, like boots pressing down on dry leaves. It was far off at first, but it was definitely footsteps. My heart thudded in my chest. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint it. The steps were slow, deliberate, and coming closer. I quietly unzipped the small flap of my tent just enough to peek out. At first, I saw nothing, just the silvered trees and the dying glow of my fire. I kept looking, my eyes scanning the edge of the clearing. Then I spotted something, a figure standing just at the tree line. A man. He wasn't moving, just standing there, half hidden in the shadows, watching my camp. I stayed absolutely still, barely daring to breathe. I couldn't make out his face, but he wore a long, dark coat, and something about the way he stood, so still, so patient, made my skin crawl. I slowly pulled my head back inside the tent and reached for my maglite and the rifle. I didn't want to shine the torch yet and give away that I knew he was there. I sat there, rifle resting across my lap, trying to figure out what to do. Minutes passed, maybe more than that. The footsteps started again. This time they circled the clearing, slow and methodical, like he was checking out the place, maybe looking for something. I sat frozen, listening to him move. Every muscle in my body was tense. Part of me thought about making a run for the truck, but my keys were still in my backpack, and the truck was parked a little way down the track. If he was armed, I wouldn't make it 20 feet. Finally, after what felt like an hour, the footsteps faded into the distance. I stayed inside the tent until the first gray light of dawn started to seep into the sky. When I finally crawled out, rifle in hand, the clearing was empty. There were no signs of him, no tracks, no rubbish, nothing. I packed up camp fast, shoving everything into the truck in record time. I drove out of there without even making breakfast, my eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror. But the story didn't end there. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Who was he? What was he doing out there in the middle of nowhere in the dead of night? Was he just a hunter, another camper? Or was he something worse? I went back home and tried to forget about it. I told myself it was nothing, just a random weirdo or some farmer checking out who was on his land. But it kept gnawing at me. A few months later, I stumbled across a news article while scrolling online. Caught my attention straight away. A body had been found not far from the Dargo area. a backpacker who had gone missing around the same time I had been camping there. They didn't release a lot of details, but police said it looked like foul play. I sat there staring at the screen, my blood running cold. I thought about that figure in the trees, standing there in the dark, watching me. I wondered if it was the same person. I wondered if that could have been me lying out there instead. From then on, I made a rule for myself. No more solo trips. No more camping in places where no one could hear you scream. It just wasn't worth it. The Australian bush could be beautiful, quiet, and peaceful, but it could also hide things and people you didn't want to meet. I still camp now and then, but I stick to well-known parks, places with rangers and lots of other campers around. I never told anyone about that night, not really. What could I even say? It sounded like something out of a movie, but sometimes, when I'm lying awake at night, I think about how close I might have come. How one bad decision, one sound, one moment of hesitation could have made all the difference. And every time I think about heading back out into the wild alone, I remember the man in the trees, standing so still, so quiet, just watching. And I stay home,